I said at the start of this video, or the end of the last video I should say, that the Tiger 900 Rally and Rally Pro was the Jekyll and Hyde of motorcycles, given that it could offer a firm sporty ride or waft along as a cruiser. But it's actually more, and we sussed out it is a bit of a Swiss Army knife.
And the key to this bike being a serious tourer is again its adjustable damping. You can pile up the bike with pillion and luggage and adjust it in a couple of minutes. The adjustable damping lets you achieve a controlled and comfortable ride, regardless of load. You don't have to accept what you are given with a non-adjustable damp bike. There's no compromise. Look, here's a great example here now.
This beautiful CB1100, a 2018 model, has no damping adjustment. On this 1995 Triumph Daytona 1200, I can adjust the damping on the rear shock and the compression and rebound damping on the front forks. I can get a smoother, more comfortable ride out of this bike than I can this bike. Crazy.
So I've said the key to the Tiger 900 Rally and Rally Pro being great tourers, especially two-up tourers and the likes of that, is the adjustable damping. But let's just wind the clock back a bit and look at preload and make sure we fully understand what we're doing with preload and why we're doing it when we load up our bike with a load of luggage. And then we'll get on to the damping.
Here's you on your bike. You're sitting on your bike, and that's grand. And the suspension is in pretty much where the manufacturer left it. And they have their preload set at a particular position. You go and sit on your bike and it sags down a tiny bit. That's fine. Your girlfriend comes along later, or your boyfriend, or your gorilla, whatever it is, and you baggage in your luggage, and you put all that weight on the rear end of the bike, and it sags right down on that rear shock. Now, it doesn't matter whether you've got twin shocks at the rear or a single shock, wherever it is, the effect is the same. You're using up your suspension travel. You might have used up 50 to 60% of it by this time. So the purpose of the preload is just to put a force back on that shock upwards, to bring the bike back up, to bring your suspension back to within kind of 70 to 80% of its usable travel. The purpose is to give you suspension travel as you're riding along down the road. But if you set off down the road and it's already at rock bottom, it's got nowhere to go. So your preload is to make sure you've got plenty of compression travel. Let's just show you that another way. Here's your bike, here's your rear shock. It can be any type of shock. And here's the two ends of your suspension. So my toilet roll here is the bottom end of my suspension, and my tube here is the top half of my suspension. So one's connected to the frame of the bike and one's connected to the swing arm somehow. So they can move freely like this. Maybe your suspension's sitting here before you get on your bike, and you get on your bike and you're an average weight person and your shock compresses by about 25%. Roughly, it gets to about 25% of its stroke. That's great. But then when you take a pillion and luggage, your shock's dropping and dropping and dropping. So now if you go off down the road, you've only got this much suspension travel left, and that's your lot. Any pothole you find, you're going to bang straight into that. It's going to be an uncomfortable ride. So the idea of the preload then is putting pressure back on the spring, pushing the spring up and bringing your shock to within 25% or 30%, somewhere roughly like that, of its operating range. So now when you go off down the road, you've got this much suspension. So it has a decent compression stroke, because that's where most of the forces are going to be. Occasionally, your wheel will go down a bit of a hole and it'll go the other way. But most of the shock work is going to be doing that way. So our preload is just to get this shock into a reasonable part of its operating range. If you go two up and add a load of luggage and you don't change your preload, when you go off down the road, your shock's sitting here and you've only got that much travel. So for a Triumph Tiger 900 Rally and Rally Pro, what you do is you wind the preload maximum, full maximum, and it'll bring the shock sitting back up to this sort of level. So that's our first thing for touring. Now we're going to damping.
Now, so when we're heavily loaded two up on our bike with all our luggage for our tour, don't forget, if we hadn't adjusted that rear preload, what we would have done is had the bike sitting back at the rear. That would have increased the trail of the bike and slowed down the bike's handling. So not only are we losing rear shock travel and possibly comfort, we're getting poor steering. You'll find a reluctance to get around corners. So the secondary byproduct, if you like, of getting our rear shock back in its normal position is we're getting the stance of the bike back to how Triumph designed it for the road, and we're getting our normal steering back, our normal feel of the bike. So now it's the turn of the damping to come into effect. Just what is it we're trying to do with the damping? Here, let me demonstrate in Studio 3.
Okay, this steel ruler here is going to be mimicking my rear spring, say on the back of the bike. Let's have a look at what happens when we add weight. The reason why the adjustable damping on the Tiger 900 Rally is brilliant is that you can tune the way the bike sits on the road. You get something like that new Honda NT 1100. You load that thing up and you have no option as to how that suspension reacts. None whatsoever. I think carefully before buying a bike like that if you're going to do big tours, especially if you're going to load them up high, two up luggage, everything like that. So now, onto our damping. We're sitting there. Our damping is in the factory position. You get on the bike and you go over a bump. And the damping is to take that oscillation out of the suspension, obviously. So it's to calm that down. So you go over a bump, bang. Our suspension's all over the joint. And the damping is just calming that down and stopping that doing that. But you go over the same bump when you're two up and loaded. So here's my pillion. Here's my luggage. We've adjusted our preload, we're back to normal. But I go over that same bump and the effect on the suspension is magnified. So the forces are much bigger. We've got much bigger forces in play here now. So the suspension, when you go over a bump, you're going to get much more undulation, much more movement in that suspension than when we just had a solo rider. So I need more damping. I need more damping to control that. And on a bike with unadjustable damping, there's nothing you can do about it. The manufacturer is just taking a bit of a middle of the ground stab at it. Well, not a stab. He'll be obviously taking a considered view on it, but he can only give you one damping profile. Whereas on your Tiger 900 Rally here now, what you would do with all this extra weight on your bike, you would add lots of damping. And it really is a 30-second job on your Triumph Tiger 900 Rally, just on that rear end, to get rid of that, or to mitigate it.
And the best bit is, the damping settings on this bike are dead simple. Just go to the manual and it'll give you a suggestion on rider and luggage, rider and passenger, rider, passenger and luggage. Interestingly, you can note there on those second two of those, they're asking you to back off that rebound damping a little bit more. And that's trying to get the bike to recover a bit quicker. So it's all there in the manual, it's dead easy to adjust, and why wouldn't you use it? You get a perfect ride out of this bike. The rear is even easier. As we said before, for the spring preload, max that out, wind that all the way in for going two up or riding with luggage, and just adjust your rebound damping as they're saying here. So rider and luggage, rider and passenger, and again rider, passenger and luggage. They're giving you three different settings here, but they're just a turn of a screwdriver. So again, check your manual from which way they're saying you turn it and all that sort of stuff, but it's a simple thing to do. And what you might have noticed, if you're looking at the user manual, the damping settings on the front forks, less of a range of adjustment suggestion compared to running solo. But it's the rear shock that has the biggest impact, because you and your pillion are sitting over that back end and your luggage is over the back end. So you'll find the change in damping recommendation on the rear shock is bigger than it is on the front forks. and they're only suggestions. They're kind of telling you which direction to go. So you might find, you get a better, you get a more comfortable ride, or a ride that you prefer, one way, slightly one way than the other way. So that's it. We've seen how versatile the Triumph Tiger 900 Rally can be. And actually the same goes up to this stage for the Rally GT, the kind of road-based bike. But the Rally Pro and the Rally Pro and just the Rally version go one stage further. It's this adjustable preload on the front forks, and it's there for a good reason, and it's there for an off-road reason. I'm going to save that for the last video to try and keep these segments a bit shorter, because I know I can prattle on a bit. So I hope that little video has shown you how having adjustable damping can change the characteristics of a bike, and how that can make a big deal to you when you're two-up riding. You can get a perfect ride for yourself and your pillion because you can adjust the damping. I'll leave it there, but in the next and last video I'm going to talk about the absolute differentiator of the suspension of this bike, specifically the Rally and the Rally Pro. It's the reason why this suspension is different on this bike, and what makes it an off-road focused bike.